Be a warrior, not a warrior. Mike Redeemer here. So I thought it would be a good idea to do a quick reading of one of my novels. The Lord had me put a lot of work into these, and He gave me a lot of the words to write, if not all of them. I just was very proud of some of these writings. And since I'm trying to help people find these books with these videos, that's one of the things the Lord wanted me to do with them. I'm not making that up. He did. I'm certainly not doing these videos necessarily because I want to be honest with you. I am not that type of person, to be honest with you. So I'm going to go ahead and read chapter 13 of Melchizedek, Kings and Priests. It's a shorter chapter, but it's one I really liked while I was writing it. These books are action-packed. They're action-adventure, futuristic sci-fi type of thing. But not too far in the future. And there is some prophetic stuff in there. Some of it happened shortly after the books were published. Some of them, I believe is still yet to come. But we'll start off with the scripture at the beginning of this chapter, chapter 13. Don't lay up treasures for yourselves on the earth, where moth and rust consume, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consume, and where thieves don't break through and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Matthew 6:19-21. So it says chapter 13, Christian Territory, Levi's Garage, Spokane, Washington, Friday, March 25th, 8:32 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Sitting in his less than comfortable cot, Jerry put a musty-smelling pillow behind his back and propped himself up against the garage's back wall. He half-heartedly flipped through the pages of the small Bible, randomly reading snippets of verses here and there, unable to make heads or tails out of any of them. Soon his eyelids grew heavy, and before he knew it, he was asleep, one of the most tumultuous and exhausting days of his life behind him. Sometime later, his eyes opened into a much darker room. Not so dark that he couldn't see at all, however. As his vision adjusted, he could see that he was no longer leaning against the wall, but was in fact lying flat on his back, twisted up in his blanket. His arm and one of his legs were entirely off the cot, so that he was teetering on its edge, about to fall onto the floor. Careful not to turn the cot over, he righted himself and sat up. His eyes opened wide, and he took a deep breath through his nostrils. Mark hadn't moved. He was still sitting on the plastic milk crate near the entrance, where he appeared to be listening to the crickets chirp in the still of the evening. His eyes were closed, his head tilted slightly upward. Eddie was also awake. He sat with his legs crossed on the air mattress next to a large pile of Levi's belongings, trying to read his Bible using the small amount of light that was coming in through the thin glass panes that were set into the door that joined the garage to Levi's kitchen. It was silent and peaceful, and Jerry didn't mind the silence, not after all he'd gone through to get there. Half awake, looking at Mark and Eddie, he realized he also didn't mind being there. Despite the fact that he was surrounded by a bunch of religious nuts, he felt that the change of pace had been good for him, even fun. And though he knew nothing about the man, Mark seemed like a good guy, and the others, the old man and the kid, were good people too. Different, but good. The rain began to fall in the harmless form of a light shower, and the choir of crickets was replaced by a steady patter. Feeling the air as it began to push itself through and around the garage like a light breeze, Jerry noticed that it was unusually warm in the evening for that time of year. Mark opened his eyes and looked into the rain. As it fell, he focused his gaze on the street somewhere beyond the end of Levi's driveway. Looking out, Jerry could see the soft glow of old lamps coming through the windows of the homes of Levi's neighbors. Some of them, it seemed, had returned home from wherever they had been that day and were settling in for the night. A waning moon began to creep its way into view over the rooftops, spilling its cool pale luminescence over everything as it rose. Mark moved the crate into the garage just behind the door to get away from the rain. He sat back down and looked up at the stars. He was no longer radiating the natural gregarious nature that normally dominated his features, having exchanged it for something else, some distant dream or memory that made him seem aloof. Jerry decided it was best not to bother him. He propped the pillow against the rear wall of the garage again and tried to move back into his former position, but noticed that he couldn't, as the blanket was wrapped around and between his limbs. The thin layer of fabric twisted its way around his left arm and leg in such a way that they could not be moved independently from one another. With an annoyed grunt, he used his free arm to untangle himself and threw the blanket onto the floor. He sat up against the wall and looked around for his Bible. Hearing a short giggling sound nearby, he looked in Eddie's direction. The boy was smiling up at him from the airbed he was sleeping on, or he had been sleeping on, quite pleased by the night's entertainment that he had provided. Eddie lifted up a hand and pointed at the floor near the discarded blanket. A corner of a small book was peeking out from under it. With another incoherent noise coming out of his mouth, Jerry got out of the cot and picked it up. He waved it at Eddie and said thanks. As Eddie returned to his reading, Jerry saw that the kid was struggling to see the pages of his own Bible in the failing light. Wide awake, he took it upon himself to search out an old, funky-looking style lamp that he'd seen earlier that day. While they were reorganizing Levi's things, after flailing through the darkest corner of the garage and tripping several times over items he could not identify, he was able to find the thin, wavy-shaped pole that the lamp was attached to. He brought it back to his cot and plugged it into an outlet on the back wall. He turned the head of the lamp to direct its light toward the ceiling so that it lit up the entirety of the small space without blinding anyone. Eddie turned toward him and smiled before moving himself into a more comfortable position on his air mattress and returning quietly to his own reading. Sitting back down on his cot, Jerry took the opportunity to examine some of the things he'd just stepped on or over. From what he could tell, most of Levi's possessions consisted of tools and trinkets from bygone eras of a consumerist culture that had desperately tried to look like it was anything but. Not seeing anything of interest, he looked down to the little Bible in his hands and attempted to continue the Herculean task of trying to make some sense out of what was really happening inside the wall. But his eyes kept wandering back to the pile of junk. They had stacked it nearly all the way to the ceiling. Old books, toys, worn-out clothes, even magazines, which had no value whatsoever, were, with his help, stacked with care. Once a nice diversion for those who had bought them so many decades before, the pile of obsolete items, out-of-fashion clothing, and assorted expired products existed in the present only as a fire hazard, kept for the sake of nostalgia alone. But perhaps he was being too hard on Levi and others like him. The man had lost a good portion of his family. Memories and the belongings that were attached to them were all that was left of their time together. Something Jerry should have been able to relate to, even if he didn't. Still, he genuinely couldn't see a reason for the old man to have all of it. Had it been his garage, he would have tossed most of the stuff out long ago. Then again, had the old man been more like him, the cots might have gone too, and the lamp, giving them their little group nothing to lay their heads on and no light to read by. The last notion took on a strangely familiar ring as it echoed through his head. Jerry started flipping through the first pages of the Bible until he saw the first words in it that appeared in large print, Genesis. He was beginning to read the first chapter when Mark said something to him. "The rain is a beautiful thing, don't you think?" he asked. Jerry put the Bible back down on the cot next to his leg. Mark was silent for a moment, for a full minute, before he continued. "Storms blow through the Midwest pretty quickly. They don't last long, but they can be pretty rough. Then there's the floods and tornadoes. In New England, storms can last for days because of the mountains," Mark continued. "They usually don't, but they can." "I've heard they can get pretty overcast up there, like it does in Seattle," Jerry said. He had misplaced his notepad and looked at the floor to see if he'd dropped it, like he had with the little book. He picked the blanket up and threw it back onto the cot. As he did so, he spied a small orange container behind the large tackle box that Levi had placed in a corner near the entrance to the house. He got out of his cot again and picked it up to look at it. Overcast, yes, but not like Seattle, Mark said. He was speaking as if in a trance, reaching out of the garage with his right hand to feel the rain as he spoke. In the far distance, a thunderclap could be heard. The sound of it was so weak that it was almost indiscernible from the noise of the rain, with no way to know from which direction it had come. To me, the rain was always far more interesting than television ever was. Mark paused. A concerned and more focused look came over his face. I never understood why people kept watching, especially when they knew that every word, every image was a lie. The only time I kept looking at something that lied to me like that was when I was addicted to it. That must be it. But people here only watch Christian programming, don't they? Jerry said with a small amount of sarcasm. He opened the plastic container. Contained inside was a red flare gun and 2 cartridges. Wondering why Levi would need such a thing, he shook his head, closed the box, and placed it back in the same place he'd found it. You would think, Mark stated simply. He looked distant, like someone who was lost in the raindrops of their past. Jerry walked to the garage opening and joined Mark's storm watch. Not wanting to be drenched again for fear of getting a cold, he decided to take a rain check on sneaking out and searching for the jammer that evening. He turned towards Mark and, with the intent of satisfying his increasing curiosity, seized the opportunity to find out more about the man. He posed Mark another question. Did you say you were once addicted to something? Damn, he thought. His tone was far too obvious. We all have our addictions, Jerry, Mark said, without missing a beat. Most of us just have trouble admitting it to ourselves, but the truth is our addictions originate from root sins, the symptoms of which destroy lives every day. But you don't need to be a Christian to know that. Mark took a deep breath and spun himself around on the milk crate to face Jerry. What was your sin? Your addiction? Jerry asked. Eddie stopped reading and carefully watched the 2 men in silence. Don't worry. It's nothing serious. At least not by your estimation, I'm sure. Nothing that isn't common to man, Mark replied. With that, he let out a small grunt of his own and stood up. He folded his arms and leaned against the side of the garage door frame. Okay, Jerry thought. He's not going to take the bait, but he's definitely a game for a debate. Let's see what he thinks about this one. Couldn't God be considered an addiction? Jerry said. After all, an awful lot of time and money go into doing things for him. People even become fanatical about him enough to kill one another. Mark's head lowered. Then he said, Is that what the rest of the world is saying about Christians these days? Yeah, sort of, Jerry said. Slowly shaking his head, Mark gave his answer. I'll be the first to tell you, especially today, that there are many sham Christians out there. But I can also tell you that there are many who have not only known God's presence, but also felt his love as they followed him and his wrath when they resisted him. Because of this, they have decided to live in obedience to his love instead of walking away to live purposeless lives driven only by their own self-gratification. Felt his wrath? Jerry asked. God disciplines his children. Those who are not being disciplined but still claim to be Christian are the ones you need to watch out for. So you're saying God hurts people for their own good. I'm saying God can cut off the things in our lives that we think are most important because we want them more than we want him. Everything here is temporary. When we go to heaven, we will be one with him forever. It's a painful process, but a necessary one. Losing what you desperately want always is. I'm saying in this way, God helps us to rid ourselves of the self-serving, destructive things we put in our lives so that we might give them up and just follow him. Only then can a person find true peace. Christians who understand how to live as the Holy Spirit leads recognize the reality of what he is doing because his word, that is the Bible, reveals it to them. And when it does, they are able to ask for his help so they can resist the temptation the next time it comes. That way, they can avoid going through the pain brought on by their sinful tendencies. He paused and looked down for a moment, deep in thought. He does not enjoy doing this. God is spirit and love, according to that book you're holding. Not some biological secretion or recurring promise of financial reward or recognition. He's a spirit that inspires us to be content in all things. He is not a system that we can manipulate. He does not give as the world gives, and because of this, could never become an addiction, at least not in the way you might describe one. In fact, you could say that he is the only real cure for it. False Christian culture, on the other hand, his words faded. Jerry said nothing. Not being a self-professed expert on anything spiritual, he couldn't think of anything to say. Besides, Mark's lengthy and unfamiliar explanation had caused him to lose interest in the topic. Instead, he responded by sitting back down on his cot. He placed the Bible on his lap and looked at it skeptically. Then he put a hand over his face and moved his fingers to his hairline. That's when he saw Eddie. The boy was looking at Mark with a reverence that Jerry had rarely witnessed. Eddie, who just a short time before Jerry would have thought incapable of following such a complex topic, had sat there attentively, soaking it all in. Perhaps the boy wasn't as simple as he originally thought. Not having gotten the kind of answer from Mark he'd hoped for, Jerry rubbed his eyes and opened his Bible again and tried to pull his mind out of the discussion that had just taken place. Mark read the tired defeat in Jerry's body language and spoke again. "But you haven't even begun to read that book yet," he said. "Like I said earlier, if you really want to understand what is happening here, you should. Go ahead, read. I won't bother you. I'm done talking now. We can talk more about it later if you want. Again, you should start with the Gospel of John. It's always a good place to start." But Jerry didn't want to start near the end. He wanted to start at the beginning. He didn't know why, but in his mind he had already determined that he would read the book his way, or not at all. Mark turned back towards the street, not noticing Jerry's face as it slowly transformed into a twisted scowl at his last remark, and for the next 2 hours stood there motionless, his thoughts lost within the raindrops. Still restless, Jerry searched for his notepad, until an old magazine caught his attention. It was partially sticking out of a stack that had been placed only a few feet from his cot. Its cover was a black and white picture of two men that looked strangely familiar to him. Next to them, in an antiquated font, were the words, "Meet the Valiant Brothers." The words reminded him of the ad he'd seen in the cab that morning. He picked it up and read the article inside until he fell back to sleep. The book is Melchizedek, Kings and Priests, Book 1 of the Melchizedek series, available on Amazon in multiple formats. Thank you for joining me for this reading. Next, I'm going to read a chapter from The Angry Prophet, the second book in the series. God bless you. The website is melchizedeknovel.com. Thank you for joining me for this reading. Be a warrior, not a warrior.